Alright, we are rolling. Alright, America, 1917 to 1953. With this presentation, I want to convey to you guys why this is my favourite part of history ever. America isn't even my favourite part of this part of history, but oh my goodness, I love it so much. So without further ado, let us get started. With World War I. So America, they don't enter the war until 1917, but why is this? Well, I shall tell you. So, this is President Woodrow Wilson. And America, he knew that his people wanted to stay neutral, even though they hated Germany, they hated what they were doing over there. So Wilson kind of intervenes a bit, he gives a bit of money to Britain and France, but ultimately doesn't get involved. Because you've got to remember, in this time period, neutral is a key word when we're talking American foreign policy. So in 1917, it changes, but why? Anyone know what this is?
Submarine.
Yes! So, the Germans... The Germans start to attack all commercial ships that are heading to Britain, and they also offered Mexico an alliance. And Wilson, he storms into Congress and he goes, "I'm calling for a war to end all wars!" And they enter on April 6th of 1917. And I think Democrats are Southern, so that was an appropriate accent for once. So after the war, according to Wikipedia, 116,500, I can't pronounce numbers, that number, American soldiers died in World War I, which is a lot, not as much as Britain and France, but the Americans were pretty upset about this, and they want a return to neutrality and normalcy, but most importantly, isolationism. You can't forget about Wilson, though. There he is, very slowly edging onto the screen. He sets up the League of Nations, and this was his condition in the Treaty of Versailles, which was the peace treaty after World War I. And it was supposed to stop future conflict by uniting countries, but it gets off to a terrible start because Wilson goes back to America and he's so excited, and he's like, "I've made this monument, world-changing thing!" And America looks at it and goes, "Nah, mate, we're not doing that." So it's a complete disaster. America isn't in the League of Nations, and this is going to be one of the reasons why it fails later. Also, no Germany and no Russia, so it looks like an anti-communist winners' club. Not good. But anyway, it's the 1920s, so who cares? Because after an initial economic slump, America experiences a huge economic boom, and it becomes the world's banker, and everything's awesome, even though it's massively unstable. But who cares? Because we've got film, we've got jazz, that's Mr. Cab Calloway, I love him. We have flappers, women's liberation, slightly. We also have the Ford Model T, cars, production lines, everything is changing. And also, don't worry that it's prohibition, because we have a flip-load of bootlegged alcohol. All the fun, you are set. So the international stuff, this is a thing I just threw in here to just kind of show you what they're up to at this point. So we have the Dawes Plan and we have the Kellogg-Briand Pact. And the Dawes Plan...
History students should know about this.
Yeah. The Dawes Plan is basically an American banker goes over to Germany. Germany's economy is in the toilet in 1924, by the way. And he says, "I will give you loads of money to rebuild your economy." And everyone goes, "Yay, America!" And it makes them look really, really good. And I think he wins the Nobel Peace Prize as well. And then in 1928, Kellogg-Briand Pact, 60 countries get together and say, "You know what? I love you guys. Let's never fight again." And they don't say what will happen if they do fight again, so it's completely pointless. Though it did turn the milk really chocolatey. Did you get the pun?
Yeah, we do. Hey.
So, meanwhile in Wall Street. So a lot of people were gaining money through stocks and shares, and the biggest place for this business was in Wall Street, in New York. However, the stocks were all about guesstimation, and everyone was buying these stocks on borrowed money, which is called buying on the margin, and the banks were buying stocks with their customers' its savings. And this would all come to a very sticky end. So what happened leading up to the Wall Street crash? Well, rumours begin that value is going to fall. This is facilitated by media, newspapers, and the radio, which is becoming really popular at this point. People begin to sell to get the profit while the prices are still high, while the going's good, and then everybody panics, and panic selling ensues, and then prices drop, and everyone loses all their money and failed investments, including the banks. And if you would like a visual representation of this, I provide you with this. So the Great Depression, I'm splitting this into part 1, which is going to be Hoover, part 2, which is Roosevelt, and then we're going to move on to the war. So this is Herbert Hoover. He is a Republican, and he was in charge from 1929 to 33. Herbert Hoover, everyone. Herbert Hoover. You guys all got that?
Yeah, have you got the dates?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Cool. So the Hoover years. Republican, and they've been popular in the 1920s because when you have a booming economy, you don't really want someone who's putting down loads of legislation on what you can and can't do. However, now America had a government, legislature, and judiciary completely dominated by Republicans who don't really care that much about the poor, particularly at this point, and they don't want to help anyone. So even if Hoover wanted to do something, he couldn't do anything because they wouldn't let him. He did do some good. Oh wait, sad Hoover. He could do some things. He did some good things. This is the Hoover Dam. It was a big public works project where he gives loads of money, says build this thing, and people get jobs. He also did bad things. This is the bonus army. So America loves war veterans, I'm sure you know. And they had been promised money that would pay out in 1940 for their services in World War I. And in the Depression, they come over and say, we need our money early. We are starving, we're homeless, and all of this kind of stuff. And they camp outside Washington when Hoover says no. And then he panics and sends in General Douglas MacArthur, who is important. Remember that name, General Douglas MacArthur. And General Douglas MacArthur goes in with tanks, armed soldiers, and tear gas to fight off these veterans. And as a result, 2 babies die. And it makes them look really bad. And this is a Hooverville, which is what they used to call the shanty towns set up by the homeless in America in this time period. Named, of course, after the president. So by 1933, over 100,000 companies have gone bankrupt. Production levels are at a mere fifth of what they were before the Depression, and 25% of the workforce is unemployed by the end of 1929. The stock exchange crashed in October, and already a quarter of their workforce is unemployed. The banks are screwed because they've invested all their customers' money in shares and lost it all. And everybody is hit by this at all social levels, extended to all classes, and also the farmers were particularly screwed, their income falling by 60%, but they've been kind of screwed since the end of World War I because they've been overproducing. So, who can save us now? Enter this guy, like a boss. This is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He becomes president in 1933, and he puts into place the alphabet agencies which make up the New Deal. They're called the alphabet agencies because there's a lot of them, and you abbreviate them, and it's a lot of letters, and you don't really need to know about that. But the first one he made was the Emergency Banking Relief Act, or EBRA. This is EBRA, this is Deborah. Deborah is irrelevant. Basically what he does is he shuts down all the banks, and only the sound ones are allowed to reopen. And he is incredibly popular, and he comes up with this idea called the Fireside Chats, and which basically is a weekly radio broadcast where he explains what's happening in terms that people can understand.
Hang on, so we're now crossing into Second World War territory, obviously. Adolf Hitler, was Adolf Hitler historians became Chancellor when?
Okay, so the New Deal itself, alphabet agencies, but we're going to look at the significance of this. And the New Deal is significant because it changes the country's relationship with the federal government. It paves the way for new welfare legislation, because you've got to remember pensions are a pretty new thing by this point. And the American people become used to government cooperation and involvement, which is going to be really useful for World War II, because you've got to remember isolationism is still a big thing at this point. I forget what comes next. Okay, yes. The New Deal was incredibly effective, and there hadn't been anything like it before, but at the time, Roosevelt didn't exactly have a rainbow shining out of his butt, as it were. A lot of liberals thought he wasn't doing enough, and a lot of sort of upper classes thought he was doing too much, and also it didn't really do that much for black people or women. African Americans would often be moved off of his alphabet agency programs to make way for white people. So it wasn't all that good. It was okay. But meanwhile, over in Europe, dun dun dun, puns. So 1939, World War II breaks out. We're up to World War II. So, America in World War II, before Pearl Harbor, they want to remain neutral, there's that word again, because they still hold a strong isolationist policy. This is demonstrated when the Japanese invaded Manchuria in 1931. Their only response to this was to pass the Stimson Doctrine, which is basically a flimsy piece of legislation that says, we do not recognize any piece of land taken by force, and it did nothing. So, Roosevelt knows that they cannot stay neutral for this one. He's aware of this, so he starts to sell